If I had a portable mic, I was going to play Oprah and pass it around so they could all introduce themselves, but I think that they're here and they're serving an important purpose of backing me up as a superintendent, because it's never a one-person job. So what we have first is the fiscal year 2014, it's the superintendent's proposed budget. Just so people understand how this works is that as a superintendent, my job is to work with the entire staff and then develop what's called a needs-based budget. This is proposed to the school committee. The school committee will now have it. They will have time to review it and then say that these additions, changes, adjustments need to be made. And then I will present a revised version in 2 weeks on the 23rd. And then there'll be a public meeting, public hearing in the first part of that, and then the school committee can vote or not to accept that budget. If the vote is positive, then that becomes the school committee accepted budget for fiscal year 2014, and that goes to the town for discussion and revision. I think that the presentation this year will be substantially different than what's been done in the past, because it's my opportunity, with the help of the staff, that we have to talk about the Southbridge Public Schools, not just look at numbers, look at the programs that we have, the issues that we have, the challenges that we have, and the successes that we have, all in the course of the next 20 minutes or so. So the first question I asked was, how did we get here? And if you look at 2012 and 2013, and all of you know better than me, this was one of the most interesting years in the history of Southbridge, and also in education here. You opened up a brand new, state-of-the-art middle high school for grades 6 through 12. You reconfigured and redistricted the 3 elementary schools, all new busing routes, all new attendance zones. New principal at West, new principal at the middle high school, 2 new APs at the middle new high school, new curriculum director, new math director, new LL director, new director of pupil personnel services. And I'm the 3rd superintendent you've had since September. And if that wasn't enough to create interesting times, as they say, we negotiated and implemented a new educator evaluation system that was mandated by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts to be eligible for the race to the top dollars, implemented a Common Core standards for math and literacy, created a standards-based curriculum units and common assessments for ELA and math, K through 12, began the implementation of PBIS, which I never remember what it is, but it's what? Positive behavior intervention system. I keep forgetting the positive. I just focus on the behavior. And it's working out quite well. That's where it's been implemented elementary. We hope to move it on to the middle high school in the near future. We've trained instructional and data coaches because the state is required Southbridge is a level 4 low-performing school districts to use data and report to them on a regular basis. We've developed school-based support teams, building leadership teams, new district leadership team, and an enhanced district data team. And then the state monitors us monthly and daily with a plan manager and a plan monitor that meets with us on a regular basis, and they report to the school committee on a quarterly basis. And then we had to develop a intense and involved and detailed accelerated improvement plan that creates what we do. And obviously, one of the questions you ask is, why does it cost more to educate a student in Southbridge? And I think that's important because when people look at per pupil expenditures in the neighboring communities, they find that it's less. And they say, well, why does it cost more in Southbridge? I think it's important that you look at the population, you look at the changes that have occurred in the demographics of this community, and we only chose to use the last 10 years. So just look at limited English proficient, that's LEP, in 2003. It was 5% of the population. You go over to the right, it doubled. It is now 10% of the population. The low income, and that had a much larger growth. In 2003, it was about 50%. In 2013, more than 70%. That is a huge increase in low-income population. The special ed population has stayed about the same. It's hovered about 17, 18%. But what has changed is that OOD number. We like that. We say OOD. It's out-of-district placement. These are the students that because of lack of programming here or highly specialized needs, whether they be medical or a host of other disabilities, we have to educate by law at local expense at a specialized setting. Then we also wanted to look at stability rates. What does that mean? It's a lot of interesting numbers and pictures and so on. Well, one of the issues in education is when you have a highly mobile student population, it is distracting for everyone, students, educators, the community, and so on. And if you look at those charts, all means all. That's not an acronym. ELL is English language learners, SPED is special education, and then it's low income. And if you look at the chart there, our ELL population has a churn rate of about 15 or 16%. That means every school year, 15, 16, 17% of our limited English proficient students come and go. Creates a disruption, creates extra need, creates issues for everyone. Not only those students that move back and forth between school districts, but also, more importantly, to the school system. We have to provide specialized programs, specialized activities, specialized teachers. So when you say, how different are we? So we thought we'd just take a look at the communities around here. Southbridge is Webster, Clinton, and Oxford. I've only been in Southbridge. I hope to get to Clinton eventually. And my goal in my bucket list is Oxford. It's supposed to be funny, folks. And I think the important thing to look at is we're 2,270 students. We're the largest of those three like districts. Our SPED population is, it varies based upon proportionality. But look at the number of second language learners that we have. We have 258. Webster has 58. Clinton has a higher number, 144. And Oxford has an astounding 6 English language learners. So you think about how that affects a classroom, how that affects what happens in the classroom, how it affects all the dynamics when students come and go and don't speak the language, how it creates additional difficulties. So I think that's a very important thing to look at. And our low-income students are considerably higher than the others. So when you look at these numbers and you look at our why it costs more, one of the things that I said earlier was special needs. And when we send a student out of district, it can range from a low figure of $25,000 a year at Project Rise, which is a local program, to over $200,000 a year at the New England Center for Children. And that's the low to high. And we have a number of students who are residential settings that cost us well over $100,000 a year. And that doesn't include transportation. And that's a local funding, so on. So we have a very high out-of-district cost. If you look at FY13, we spent $1.647 million, and then we're anticipating an increase of over $200,000 for FY14 of out-of-district SPED requests. And then you got to remember that if a student moves in any time of the year, we are required in their IEP to meet that, and then we may have to send that student out of district at very high costs, not only in tuition, but also in services and transportation. So when you look at that, and you look at that cost going up, it becomes incumbent upon the school system to say, how can we bring some of those students back? But it's more realistic to say, how can we keep the students that we have from going out of district? Bringing them back is difficult for lots of different reasons. We'll talk about that later. But I think Southbridge needs to be planning more effectively for in-district programs to keep our students. So we need to save about $1.4 million, and so we need to add staff, programs, and transportation. So we're proposing, and this is again draft, clearly educational support programs. And we're looking at behavior specialists and clinicians. You heard a couple of parents speak earlier, and they were concerned about their children, and rightfully so. So we have to look at how do we create programs in behavior modification. How do we create in-district programs? Because it's not fair to take a student because of behavior issues and then put him on a van and ship him out of town when his friends, his neighbors, and the people who will be interacting with are here locally. So it makes not only financial sense, but also good educational and social sense to keep as many students as you can in the district. As we develop the PBIS program, as we develop our behavior programs, obviously the secondary school is one of major concern because you have a 6th grade, well 6 to 12, and a whole lot of difference between an 11-year-old and a 20-year-old in grade 12, an 11-year-old entering grade 6. So we have to be cognizant of that. As you know, about a month or so ago, we changed the entry and egress processes. The building is now being used as it was originally designed. Still more works need to be done. The middle school students are on their side, the high school students on their side, and next year we have even more plans to create better organizational structure that will meet the needs of the middle school students and the high school students, age appropriate, and I think that's and developmentally appropriate programs. So when we look at SPED, what our needs are for the future, again, adjustment counselors, we don't have any. Okay? And when you're talking about a high low-income population, we're talking about a high ELL population, and we're talking about a high SPED, and not all of them are severe. We need adjustment counselors that would be working. We need to increase school psychologists, the district coordinator for all of this, and so on. And we're looking at very importantly, looking at how we provide SPED services to the community. It's been one of the sore spots in the community, and rightfully so. And so we need to be very careful of how we restructure the organization to better meet the needs of the SPED students and the regular ed students. And then there's the whole issue of transportation. When you open the new middle school in, I think it's in Oxford. I know it's not in Southbridge because you got to drive about 50 miles to get there. And so you went from centrally located Cole Avenue, and you moved them all out there. So every student, virtually every student, needs to be bused. And once they're there, they can't cut. So that works out pretty well too. So there's a plus side to that. And we also have 2 late bus routes. We have 2 buses in there right after school, about 3:30, and then one athletic after 5 o'clock. And then the reconfiguration and redistrict of the elementary school, we have additional transportation costs, and any student grade 1 through 5, mile away, and 1.5 for older students, they'll be bused. So the additional busing costs occurred this year. And when we start looking at all this, you have to look at this as just a chart. In-district transportation costs in 2010 was about $600 per student, And then in the last 2 years, it's moved up to almost $1,000 per student. So that's a huge increase, and we have to look at how we can assess, address, and maintain and slow down the increase in transportation. Here's the figure that gives our pupil personnel director a little bit of agita. That's Italian for those of you that don't know. Special education costs for transportation for about 17% of our students, right? It costs more than the other 80-some% that we have. And that's $1.3 million for SPED and then $1.1 million for everybody else. So that's a huge chunk of change that has to be looked at very, very carefully in this coming year. Again, as we look at the changes in the population, self-explanatory. The Hispanic population here has gone from about 35%, and every year it's increased. And this year it dropped a little bit. So over 40% of our students are Hispanic background. And so as we provide ELL services, and the state also has added additional requirements for us to have sheltered English immersion. All teachers have to be trained, so we're going to have an additional cost that's not going to go away. So we have to look at better ways of developing and presenting our services to second language students. So the current staffing that we have, which we don't intend to change too much in the budget, is up there. A couple teachers at CSS, 3 at West, 1 full-time at middle school and 2 tutors, and then 4 paras and 1 full-time at the high school. So when you look at the 10 years or so that the school system has been labeled underperforming and chronically underperforming, you'll see that AYP, that's something everybody's been heard on a regular basis, from 2004 to 2012, yet there's one aberration in the middle that none of us have an explanation for in 2009, when everybody made AYP, including all subgroups. We find that statistically hard to understand. So that, but if you go back again, I think I want to focus just a little bit on that. All right. We have technical difficulties with this computer, just make, so on, but that was one thing that I saw yesterday for the first time that stuck out in my mind, that is a huge aberration. And at that same time, when you look at the graduation rates over the 4 years, the cohort rate means that the incoming 9th graders, how many came in grade 9, and then 4 years later, how many graduated. So if you look at 07, 08, 119 students, and out of that, the graduation rate was 64%. 08, 09, when that aberration was there where everybody passed, the graduation rate was even lower, at 57%. And it's increased in the last 2 years that we have the data for. Again, this is substantially lower than the state average. The state average is considerably higher. I worked in Brockton, and the population we had in Brockton when I was superintendent has similar low income rates, but a substantially higher minority rate and a substantially higher ELL rate, and yet our graduation was in the high 80s. We were one of the highest in the state. That was because we focused on working with all of students and try to develop programs that met the needs of the students. So that's one of the things we want to do here. We didn't break out, and we will in a later presentation in the spring when we look at planning for next year. We'll break them out by subgroups and show you what the actual rates are. So 69%, folks, is completely unacceptable in today's economy. And if many of you have we had no choice but to see programs and listen to radio and read the paper when they talk about the income gap between a high school dropout versus a college graduate. Not only is it a huge difference in the millions of dollars of future earnings, But what's even more interesting are the societal costs for high school dropouts. The cost of medical care, because they typically have a job that doesn't provide insurance, so that becomes an issue to the community. The issue of getting social services is high. And the one thing that astounded me was when I looked at these statistics comparing education levels and accomplishment was the rate of marriage. And if you're a high school dropout, the likelihood of you being married is considerably less than a college graduate. And then when you think about it, that's an interesting little thing. Then you say that some of the women are pretty smart. They're not going to marry someone that's not going to be able to provide for them on a long-term basis. It makes perfect sense. And so that creates families that are not nuclear, and it creates other societal costs. So when you start looking at gaps between educational attainment, it is not only dollars and cents, but the societal costs, not only in medical services, social services, but also in the family issues and so on. So I think that's often overlooked, but I found that to be one that I spent quite a bit of time looking at because it just struck me as an outlier. But 69%, completely unacceptable in today's world. And those jobs that were here 50 years ago, for those that didn't graduate, could have gotten a good job in the mill or in the other industries and so on, but today they're virtually shut out. The only area they have would be lower paying service jobs. So it becomes critical for this community, if it's going to prosper and be successful, is to work on dropout prevention programs, provide alternatives, and so those students can be more successful. So that was an interesting statistic when we looked at it. We've developed a host of curricular additions that we're going to look at. And one of the things that Amy, sitting next to me, has been working on is the program of studies at the high school level. We don't offer enough electives. We don't offer enough programs that will be able to graduate students that are at the language that the state and uses now is college or career ready. Work ready. We want kids to be work ready. And so they have to have the necessary skills. And so we're looking at expanding some of our STEM programs, that's science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And we're looking at restructuring how we offer the courses, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. But when you start looking at SAT preparation courses within the day rather than making it an add-on, we want kids to take the college boards. We want kids to take ACT tests and so on. And we have to provide programs within their day rather than say it's after school, making it a hindrance. So you did a lot of these things well a few years ago. They just got away from it. So we need to go back to those things that the Southbridge did well. And I think that, so you can switch a little bit further, I'll come back to this. Go to the restructuring one. Okay. So as we're looking for more dollars, and I'll close with that in a little bit, is that since the state requires, we require, and if you're talking about differentiated instruction, if you're talking about different kinds of students in your classroom, and you want to be able to teach them at where they are, you got to know where they are, and how do you know that? If you don't have data, it becomes meaningless. So we have data coaches, we're looking at organizing that, and then developing a plan that every adult in the Southbridge Public Schools is data literate and knows how to use that data, manipulate that data for the benefit of the student, not to provide just numbers to the state or me, for the benefit of the student. And one of the things we will be working on is developing with Julie back here and so on, is a better organization and dissemination to the community of where we are, where the kids are. And I think that what I want to see is a dashboard in a little while so parents can go on and see where the school is, where their kids are in relation to other places. The school committee needs different kinds of data. The superintendent's office needs different kind of, teacher needs different kind of data. So this is what we're going to work on. This is a long-term plan. The second one is what we want to talk about a little bit more, and we'll have another slide of restructuring. But the true middle school concept, and what does that mean? There's lots of middle schools in this country, and they say we're implementing a middle school concept, and yet they create the 4 core teachers, and they give each one of them 45 to 50 minutes. They ring a bell, and the kid goes from class to class to class. That's not what a middle school concept was meant to be. The middle school concept was that 4 core teachers, science, math, social studies, and ELA, work together as a team. And our plan is to also add a SPED teacher to that team. And they plan around the needs of the kids, the strengths of the kids, and it becomes truly interdisciplinary. They control their schedule. They want to work on a unit in science, and the other 3 teachers work with them. That's what they do. It isn't time-bound. Right now we have a wonderful process where we ring bells, and then we move hundreds of kids from place to place to place every 45 or 50 minutes. It really worked well at the turn of the century because you were trying to create efficiencies, you created discrete subjects, and you wanted the factory mentality. It doesn't work that way today. We're talking about a whole host of different skills, the soft skills that will allow you to be successful in the 21st century. And it's timeliness is not necessarily godliness. So you think about the day you went to, you ring a bell, boom. You got more trouble for being late than for not doing your homework. I see some of you chuckling, and that's what happens, okay? So I think the focus is in the wrong place. By empowering teachers with their teams to be responsible for that group, it'll create the stability, it will create that necessary adult-student relationship, and it'll also make discipline better in the schools. So the kids running in the halls every 7 times a day. Think about that, right? When do kids get in trouble in school? Cafeteria, in the hall, and in the bathroom. If you find ways of dealing with that, and one of the things is that middle school concept will do that. And then teachers and so on, we're looking at team leaders for each one of those teams, and so they will be able to deal with that in a flexible manner. I always use this example as an adult. Think about how you would function if you had 7 different bosses a day. Every 45 minutes you had a different demand. Think about it. Right? You went to Mr. Jones in math, Ms. Smith in science, this and that, and you take a 12-year-old, stick him in that position, and say function. The kid with the little Franklin planner will do fine. But the others are going to have a little adjustment issue. So we're looking at that. Electives again, and then the freshman academy that you had needs to be looked at and reinstituted again to create a true team. We look at the freshman academy, and we may have difference of opinion. This is again works in progress, is who needs to be in the freshman academy and what do they need? And what kind of teachers do they need for them to be successful? And how much movement do you actually need? So we're looking at administration. You'll see a chart on that in a second. And then all of it, and then central office and all of the roles of the supervisors, instructional people. Our plan, we're going to present after the budget gets implemented to the school committee for review and discussion. Will be a dramatic restructuring of what Southbridge Public Schools looks like. So here it is. Hope you're all holding your breath. You can get excited about it. Because currently what we have is, and you've had this forever, is subject area specialists. And the subject area specialists were primarily in English language arts and math and maybe in ELL and so on. But what about the other subjects? So they didn't exist, so there was that gap. We looked at that as one of the issues. So we said, what would make the best sense at Southbridge Middle High School? So our proposal is, we thought out of the box, is that obviously one principal, and then we have 2 assistant principals, one each for the high school and one for the middle school, 6-8. And then when we're talking about an educational unit, we need someone that's in charge of academics. And so we're proposing an academic dean that will be able to work with the principal and so on. And then looking at the what we currently have, I said, Most of our teachers know the curriculum extremely well. We've aligned and realigned the curriculum about 50,000 times in my career. We don't need more of that. What we need is ensure that the new educational program, changes are made in the classroom, and so on. How do we ensure that that occurs and helps? So we're proposing a director of elementary education, director of middle school education, and director of high school education. And when I went to the high school, when I first came here in January, I had a wonderful conversation about scheduling and so on. And I thought all the departments were there. So I asked them, and I walked over to the music department and I said, did you guys like my scheduling conversation? They said, we weren't there. And I said, why? Well, there's only 4 department heads, math, English, science, and social studies. And how about everybody else? Well, they're not represented. So I said, that leads to part of the problem, which is lack of communication or poor communication. So we got to figure out ways we can increase the ability to communicate. And then one area that was completely overlooked is high school and middle school guidance. It's reports to the Director of Pupil Personnel Services. It'll still continue to, but for line authority, we would look at the directors of education. And what will they do? It's one of the things that we're looking at is they will work very closely with the principals, with various teachers, the various programs to ensure a consistency of purpose, a consistency of focus, and quality programming and teaching. That's what we're looking for. We're not looking for here's a new curriculum for this at this particular level. We've done enough of that. The state has done it for us. It's called the frameworks. And again, all of this, it's not going to cost any more money than what we currently do because we're going to eliminate the English language arts, the math, the ELL, and then embed it in the particular areas. We already have 3 assistant principals, so we just redirect what they do. And then the addition of supervision over guidance just becomes an additional responsibility. So it's a no cost, virtually no cost. It's actually a cost saving of $34,000 because we looked at the actual salaries. We expect to get cheaper people. New people, okay? I'm just being a wise guy. It's a long night, it's been a long day, and so on. So I think that without a sense of humor, you couldn't work with kids all day. And without a better sense of humor, I couldn't work with some of you adults all day. Moving on, yeah. So that's really the story I wanted to tell. What I wanted to say was, hey, look at Southbridge Public Schools. And people like to complain and criticize. But you just think of the changes the school system went through in the last couple of years. And they still functioned. And that's because an awful lot of good, hard-working, concerned people, teachers, administrators, custodians, cafeteria workers, all of these people that come in, work hard and so on, and they've been through a lot. You have totally revamped your entire school system in 1 year. You created a middle high school. You took the organization that you had with different grade levels, created 2 1 through 5s, and created a K and pre-K in one fell swoop, and you did a pretty good job. Did you have hiccups and problems along the way? Of course you did. But sometimes you don't give yourself enough credit for accomplishing a major thing. I've worked in other school districts, and I know other schools that would spend 3 years arguing over changing the bus routes. And if they were going to reconfigure some of the elementary schools and attendance zones. It takes a lot. You guys did it. So you got to give yourself a little pat in the back every now and then that you accomplished. And you got a beautiful, state-of-the-art middle high school in Oxford, but that's another issue. And so on. So that's one of the things I want to say, that there was a lot of good people putting in a lot of time and effort. And sometimes in our criticism of and focus on negativity, we tend to forget that. The second thing that I think is important for the community to know and everybody to know is that there's been a huge demographic change. We showed you the data. And yet there hasn't been any change in the way you organize yourself to teach. Okay? The population changed. The students come from all over the place with different needs, and yet we kept the same old structure in place. I always joke about the classical definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. And so we had to propose a radical departure from the existing structure. Otherwise, we weren't going to get anywhere. All we could do is blame each other. And I think almost all of you have heard my favorite organizational guru, W. Edwards Deming, and I quote him all the time. And one of the things I learned in my study was that too often we blame people when it's really the organizational structure that's at fault. And I think that some of the issues that you created were organizational, and a huge turnover of personnel. I mean, I'm surprised some of you are still smiling at it, and so on. And hopefully now, one of my functions in the next year and a couple of months that I'll be here is to work with the great staff that I have sitting behind me, those that are in front of me, and so on, and create a structure that is student-centered, student-oriented, and that'll outlast individuals. That's the goal. And all this costs money. So the town's appropriation in FY13 was $23,758,000 and change. This year they want to appropriate $24,758,000. So the difference is $1 million more. So they're proposing a 4.2% increase. As I said to you, the superintendent's proposed budget is a needs-based budget. I'm proposing a budget that we're saying this is how much money we need in order to be able to accomplish the challenging and difficult task of educating this extremely diverse population with high need for the 21st century. We can't do it on less dollars. So our proposal here is a 5.98% increase of $25,179,596. That is the superintendent's recommended needs-based budget. Initially, I didn't show you was that I asked all of the schools to send me what they wanted, what they thought they needed. And what they proposed was a 10% budget. And so we as a team sat and looked at and pared it down to 5.98% budget. Now, the other thing you have to recognize in Chapter 70 funds, which the governor proposed, because of the high need that was shown for Southbridge with the high ELL population, the high poverty population, and the increase of about 70-some new students. You've had more new students come back in. Ninth highest Chapter 70 allocation for the state, about $1.6 million was what it's in the governor's budget. So whether that becomes a reality or not is up to the vagaries of Boston. So my recommendation of 5.98%, and all the years I've been the superintendent, that's the smallest recommendation I ever made, by the way, percentage-wise. And now it's up to the school committee now to review this, come back to me with what they feel, and they will obviously meet with the town council and the town manager, as I will, and then we'll have a conversation, and then my recommendation will more than likely change. And being a realist that I am, actually I'm an optimist, but I don't envision my budget being increased. So there'll be some more paring that has to be done. But it's not going to be done by me, by myself. It's going to be done by the team. Everything I've done so far, and I think that's really important for people to know, is that Buzz Nemrico does not make a decision by himself. He always brings it back to the people, and we have the district leadership team behind me, and every Tuesday morning for a couple hours we all sit down and meet, and I tell them very simply that if I don't hear it at the table, right, if you don't put it there, I'm not going to act on it. Don't say to me, Buzz, can I talk to you privately, make a little deal on the side? Don't work that way. I learned a long time ago that transparency is the key. And if you see the school committee, everything that I ask, that I do, I present copies of it to everybody. This is a draft. And the other thing I learned a long time ago is, even though 12 of us or 14 of us sat here and worked on this, hey, we might have missed something. You guys got some better ideas, some different suggestions, some good ideas. We're ready to hear it. I'm very open to that. I think I demonstrated that with the various meetings I've had with the stakeholders in this community. So that's my recommendation of $25,179,596. And all of you that live here and everything else, you have to make a decision. Is this an appropriate sum to improve what we have? And how can I work to make sure that we get the necessary dollars to accomplish that? As we showed you, that we're not outrageously higher than the surrounding communities, but we got much greater need. And I'll say that again, we have much greater need. And we have to organize ourselves smarter so we can accomplish that. The other thing is I want to compliment all of the teachers, all of the staff that we have over here to work in an urban district. Southbridge is a small town, but it's an urban district. It's harder. It's a whole lot easier to go to surrounding suburbs, deal with a less diverse population, less needy, and accomplish what you want. But I want to thank all of you and compliment you all, because this is the most satisfying thing you can do, working with this population. You're making a contribution, not only to make Southbridge better, but the whole Commonwealth and the country better, because your job is harder. Easier to cut and run. Easier to cut and run. But these are the people that need you. I could have left in June. I originally only came to stay 6 months. And I didn't get suckered. The decision the school committee worked with was I saw the need, and it makes me feel better. I actually like the fact that I came out of retirement, and if I can help with all of your support, I'm going to go back and a couple of good karma points for me. I'm Buddhist. Okay. And I hope that you feel the same way, because obviously you do. You're here, and many of you have been here for a long time. That Southbridge needs to get off of level 4. I'm meeting with the Deputy Commissioner, Alan Ingram, and Ms. Foisey, Linda Foisey will be here on May 2nd, and I'll take them over to the middle high school. That's where we'll spend most of the morning with them, and we discussed the issue that Mr. Lazar brought up, a very legitimate issue, was, what's the timeline? What's the exit plan to get out of level 4? And so what we got were kind of ambiguous answers. But we will have the people to make that decision here. You were in my office when I spoke to Ms. Foisey. He says, yes, we will work on that. So I want to know, what do we have to do as a system, okay, to move up? And I want a concrete plan. I don't need another accelerated improvement plan that's 150 pages long. That if you have insomnia, this will be a cure for it. I guarantee you. Okay, it'll cure it. Right next to our curriculum guides, right? All right, so that's where I am, and I'll turn to the school committee if they have any questions or comments for me. Thank you for putting up with me and listening to me. So you guys can go back.